Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're looking at an existential threat that is, quite literally, knocking on our front doors. But the crazy part? It primarily targets the invisible arteries of our civilization. I'm talking about our water and wastewater systems. You know, those sprawling, massive networks of pipes, treatment plants, and reservoirs that we completely take for granted, well, right up until the second they stop working. And right now, climate change is putting an absolute unprecedented strain on these exact systems, testing their network resiliency like never before.
So it really begs the question, what actually happens to our water systems when the climate just rewrites the rules of water? We aren't just talking about some theoretical, far-off environmental issue here. We are looking at massive, immediate physical and financial challenges. Utilities are staring down rising sea levels, increased water stress, and incredibly intense precipitation. These threats directly jeopardize their ability to just keep the water flowing. And if these utilities fail, the costs, both in human terms and capital expenditures, are going to be astronomical.
To really wrap our heads around how utilities are tackling this, we're going to look through the lens of the SASB standards for water utilities and services. Now, under the IFRS Foundation, these standards provide a really rigorous framework. And I want to be clear, this isn't just about environmental consciousness, it's about financial materiality. This standard forces utilities to meticulously measure and manage these extreme climate variables, mainly because these risks directly affect a utility's cash flows, its access to finance, and its overall cost of capital over the short, medium, and long term.
Section 1. The climate change threat. For water utilities, this threat creates an environment of total, mind-bending uncertainty. It's essentially a two-front war of sheer irony. You've got too much water on one side and way too little on the other. Utilities are out there fighting drowning infrastructure from intense precipitation and severe storms, but at the exact same time, they're battling high baseline water stress and severe droughts. So think about that. They have to design and fund infrastructure that can somehow survive being entirely submerged in floodwaters while simultaneously pulling water from bone-dry sources. It's a massive puzzle.
Section 2. Too much water.
Okay, so wastewater treatment plants are almost always built at the lowest elevation points in a city. Makes sense, right? You want to allow gravity to collect the sewage. But how do we measure the risk to those low-lying plants when sea levels rise? Well, the standard relies on a very specific definition, the 100-year flood zone. This refers to land areas subject to 1% or greater chance of flooding in any given year. Think coastal floodplains or those low-lying areas right along major rivers. We've seen this play out in real-world scenarios where massive flooding leaves entire cities under boil water advisories for weeks. Utilities can't just guess at this risk. They must track exactly how much of their wastewater treatment capacity, measured in cubic meters per day, sits directly inside these high-risk 100-year flood zones.
And here is exactly why that location data matters so much. When an intense storm hits, it brings a deluge of water that can easily exceed a treatment facility's maximum capacity. When that happens, the gross reality is that the system backs up or overflows, and that results in the release of raw, untreated effluent directly into the environment. It's a massive environmental hazard, it's a huge human health risk, and it can trigger severe regulatory penalties that literally jeopardize a utility's social license to operate.
So to understand the true scale of these overflow disasters, utilities track specific data points known as sanitary sewer overflows, or SSOs. They have to report the raw number of incidents, plus the total volume of sewage released, which they measure in cubic meters. But the absolutely crucial operational response metric here is the percentage of volume recovered. Utilities have to track how much of that discharged sewage they actually manage to capture and pump back into the sanitary sewer system for proper treatment.
Section 3. The water stress crisis.
Now let's flip the script. Climate change is making our historical water availability models completely obsolete. To manage this crippling challenge of simply not having enough water, utilities must aggressively track their sourcing. Specifically, they measure the total volume of fresh water, and they define that as water with less than 1,000 parts per million of dissolved solids sourced from regions facing high or extremely high baseline water stress. And they rely on really advanced tools to determine this, like the World Resources Institute's Aqueduct tool. They also have to track how much of this scarce water they're forced to purchase wholesale from third parties, because that directly impacts their operating costs and ultimately your customer rates.
Section 4. Unplanned service disruptions.
All of this infrastructure stress eventually trickles down, pun fully intended, to the consumer. What actually happens when the water flowing simply isn't safe to drink? The ultimate metric of a utility's resiliency is the number of customers affected by disruptions.
And by customer, the standard specifically means individual service agreements at single properties. Tracking this number is so vital because infrastructure failure isn't just some abstract technical or engineering issue, it represents a massive human cost. A complete water shutoff or even a low-flow restriction completely upends daily life, shuts down businesses, and halts emergency services.
But it's not just about who is affected, it's about for how long. Utilities categorize the duration of these unplanned disruptions into 3 buckets: under 4 hours, 4 to 12 hours, and 12 hours or more. This includes complete water shutoffs and boil water advisories. You know, those situations where the water pressure drops so low that contamination is a serious risk. Tracking these durations is absolutely essential for understanding the true severity of a utility's vulnerability to extreme weather events. I mean, if your disruptions routinely fall into that 12 hours or more category, your network resiliency is fundamentally compromised.
Section 5. Strategy and Capital Expenditures. So, what do we actually do about all this? Look, tracking granular climate data is pretty useless unless it informs strategic action. Smart utilities are fighting back against these threats by making massive, calculated capital expenditures to harden their networks. Every single climate threat demands a specific, funded strategic response. Facing rising sea levels, the CapEx response is to physically relocate or harden that wastewater treatment capacity. Dealing with severe storm intensity, you need general infrastructure upgrades. Risk of infrastructure failure from, say, earthquakes or superstorms, you invest in building redundant systems. Facing drought, you've got to diversify your water sources, maybe integrating recycled water or alternative watershed-based approaches. It takes serious, long-term strategic planning to ensure safe, continuous service.
To actually execute these strategies, utilities are leveraging incredibly advanced tools. They aren't just looking at past weather data anymore. They can't. They are implementing global gridded climate models to predict future extreme scenarios. They're utilizing real-time current storm tracking technology to manage immediate risks. They are actively involved in broader climate adaptation programs, and they are engineering complex redundant systems so that if one facility goes down, another can seamlessly take over the load. It's all about identifying the vulnerabilities before the disaster even strikes.
Which brings us to our final thought for this explainer. As the climate changes, the old models are breaking. As 100-year floods increasingly become an annual threat, the question isn't just whether the water is running today. The real question is your local utility strategically planning and investing the necessary capital right now to keep the water flowing tomorrow? Think about those invisible arteries operating right beneath your own streets the next time you turn on the tap. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and keep learning.